When meteorologists describe rain and storm coverage, we're talking about how much of an area is expected to see precipitation. These terms help you, the viewer, understand whether rain will be spotty or widespread. Think of a pizza with toppings. Isolated means very few showers, about 10 to 20% coverage, so most locations stay dry, like just a few pepperonis on the pizza. Scattered indicates a random distribution with roughly 30 to 60% of the area seeing rain, so the pizza becomes a little bit more covered. Numerous suggest high coverage around 60 to 80%, meaning many locations will get wet, similar to a pizza with most of the toppings filled in. Widespread means nearly everyone sees rain, typically around 90 or more percent coverage, like a pizza at or over capacity, comparable to a washout of a day. Meteorologists also describe rainfall by intensity, which refers to how hard it's raining. Light rain produces small amounts of precipitation, while moderate rain is steady and more noticeable. Heavy rain falls at high rates and can quickly lead to ponding or flooding concerns. Duration terms add more detail, like drizzle for very fine drops or showers for rain that changes intensity and moves quickly. You may also hear the word intermittent or occasional, meaning rain starts and stops over time. Forecasts often include probability of precipitation, or POP, which is the chance of measurable rain at a location. So remember, together coverage, intensity, and duration explain not just if it will rain, but how much of us will see it and how impactful that rain may be to you.